So, doom scrolling on Instagram, I came across this reel from another podcast, and I wish I could remember who it was so I could shout it out. But I'm kicking myself for never having made this connection before. But they were saying how Die Hard and Alien are the same movie,
Right.
the same story, told from the opposite perspectives. Where in Die Hard, you have the movie from the perspective of John McClane, the lone superhero cop
Yes.
who is single-handedly, one by one, taking out this terrorist thief organization throughout Nakatomi Plaza.
Yes.
They don't know where he is. He's going through all the ductwork, and he's unstoppable.
Right.
And then in Alien, you
Right.
have it from the crew perspective of this unstoppable, unkillable machine of death crawling
Right.
through the ductwork, taking them out one by one. And
Does one woman and a cat get away in both?
I don't think there's a cat in Die Hard. That would be
It
amazing.
makes it, right?
The cat makes
The
it.
cat
Yeah.
makes it. It's been a minute since I've actually watched both not that long ago.
Yeah.
But
So
yeah.
here's what I'm going to posit now.
Okay.
I believe that since that is the case, I think we can now say the Alien is a Christmas movie.
Alien is also a Christmas movie.
Yep.
Interesting. Do we know the dates?
Die Hard is and
Well, no. Well, I know that
or
Alien's 79
yes,
and
and
Die Hard's
Die Hard,
89, right?
I think so.
Yeah. But do we know that it's in space? But do we get Earth
I
dates?
don't remember. I think there might have been one.
What
It's
is it, Earth
maybe
dates?
100 years in the future or something.
Yeah, I wonder. And then what time of year does that even count?
Well,
Does that
okay,
even
here.
count in
So
space?
Prometheus,
Okay, I like.
Alien prequel.
Yes, I like Prometheus.
I did too. They are setting up a Christmas tree at the beginning of the movie on board the ship.
Okay,
So I think
okay.
we're onto something here. I think that you can safely say that the Alien franchise are Christmas movies.
Because the Alien franchise, like Dr. Talos being the inspiration for Frankenstein,
Yes.
it was Die Hard going back in time to inspire Alien.
Yeah.
It was the ripples of the future.
Yep.
Rippling back down. Okay, I
100%.
I buy it. I buy it. I do think that's a really interesting idea. Um, and thinking of John McClane as the Animorph. Xenomorph.
Yeah.
Animorphs is a different thing.
I'll say,
I never did read an Animorph.
I would like an Animorph book of some child turning
Coming into the
John
Xenomorph or to John McClane. Well, honestly, you could get both.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. It's
Um,
the new series of Animorph books. And on that note, welcome Mike Vannon
Hi,
to Under Towers podcast. I'm Steven.
I'm Daniel.
And we are unfortunately without our beloved Samwise. He has somehow found his way down into Alephrice.
Oh,
We don't know if he stumbled there on his own accord or if he was kidnapped by some elf queen
or traded.
perhaps for a different Sam that may be joining us next episode. But in any case, we hope that it is a short visit for him so that we see him again in a week or so and not in a few years. But
Yeah.
in the meantime, we got a great episode for you guys. We're going to have two little things of news to discuss. We're recording this on the 26th of September.
Yes, correct.
And a couple really exciting things dropped this week. The first of which was the announcement trailer for the new PS5 game Ghost of Yotai, which is a indirect sequel to Ghosts of Tsushima, which came out in 2020. One of my absolute favorite games.
I'm not familiar.
It's a open world third person game with it doesn't really have RPG elements except for like you do gain items that you can use and better weapons, better armor sets, and you do improve your skills as you go on. So there is that kind of Western RPG thing.
Because Zelda doesn't. That's how you progress in Zelda.
I have not played the new Zelda game, but I would say like Witcher.
Okay,
it's very similar to The Witcher. There's no magic because it's set. It's a historical game. but as far as the feel of the open world and the exploring and everything is very much uh Witcher is
Sure.
the comparison, I think.
Cool.
Yeah, Ghost of Tsushima was phenomenal. It was set in the 1300s Japan
Mm,
during the Mongol invasion,
cool.
and you play Jin Sakai, this young samurai who is one of the few surviving samurai on the island of Tsushima after the Mongols invade. And you're trying to take back the island, and it
Mm,
explores all these really phenomenal themes of honor and what you're willing to do to protect your people and your family, and
it's cool.
the distance that you're willing to go to protect those instead of just trying to protect your honor.
I forget the Mongols went the other way too.
Hmm.
I know that they do. I mean, they definitely uh, doing the business in China was a big part of it.
And
Um,
they went from China to Japan.
yes,
And so this, I believe,
which
is
makes
I
sense.
believe the character, the big bad in the game is the grandson, I believe, of
Genghis,
Genghis Khan.
Genghis.
Um, and
I just don't think of Mongols in boats.
I know,
I don't think
big
of it.
boats,
Big boats
big old
with the
boats.
horses.
Well, and
Horses on
that's the
boats.
thing that uh ended their campaign, I believe, was the massive storm, and
Sure.
which
Interesting.
they they actually what is it, the great wind, the I'm forgetting the term, um
Typhoon.
no, the fucking sending the suicide ship planes,
Kamikaze.
yeah, kamikaze. I think that's the I think that comes from
It
that.
means a great wind. I think that's
I think
right.
so. I could be totally
Fact check us.
please fact check us
Fact
because
check.
I'm floundering here. But anyways, I believe that was the actual reason that the Mongols never successfully invaded mainland Japan, was because of getting swamped
That makes
at
sense.
sea.
They just did a few of the islands.
Yeah,
I got you.
yeah, and they
Okay.
never made it farther than that. Um, and then so that was the first game, and is absolutely phenomenal. It's one of the only games that I've actually like platinumed to every single thing possible.
Ooh,
So this game is set 300 years in the future. Female samurai protagonist, and looks just unbelievably stunning. And Ghost of Tsushima, all the way back in 2020, was one of the most beautiful games I've ever played.
mm,
Beautiful to the extent where they had a whole Kurosawa mode that was like black and white with film grain and everything, like super cool. And I could never turn it on because the game was so beautiful that
mm.
I couldn't stand to lose the colors.
Oh wow.
So very excited. There's a lot of cool gameplay stuff where like you don't have a map or a compass that shows you which direction you're supposed to go. You hit a button on the controller and the wind will blow and you in the
You
direction
have
that you're
to.
supposed to go.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, that's fun.
So that's very exciting. Like I've said before, I don't pre-order games anymore. That will be an exception to that rule. The other trailer that just dropped today, as of recording, was the first official trailer for The Last of Us season 2 on HBO, and they fucking nailed it.
Nice.
There is a Pearl Jam song in the game that Joel plays on guitar, and they use it in the trailer. Like he plays it for Ellie at the very beginning of the game. It's not a spoiler, it's literally the beginning of the game. And I was getting so choked up in my truck at work today because as soon as that song hit,
Wow.
um,
Which song is it?
it's oh, now you're gonna ask me.
The
It's
Yellow Ledbetter.
no, no, it's I'm gonna trim this. Last of Us, Pearl Jam. It's Future Days is what
Okay.
it's called,
Okay.
and it's a beautiful. I'm really looking forward to seeing it in the show because it's a beautiful song on its own.
Sure.
But the way that like they showed, Joel's not a singer. He can play guitar fine, but he's not a singer. But it's so heartfelt singing to his daughter Ellie that like it's just, and like, as a girl dad, it's like
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
everybody just better prep your butts to get wrecked
Okay.
this season. Wrecked.
Yeah. That's what I've heard. Are they doing? Do we know how many more seasons? Because I know
Um,
there's just the two games. Will they split the second game up into a couple?
they're
Probably.
they're splitting it into two seasons, and I
Okay,
honestly don't know how you could tell the whole story without it.
sure. Yeah, because it gets bigger.
It's a
It
much
gets
bigger
yeah.
story, um, and following two
There's
different
more. There's
protagonists.
more. Yeah, yeah,
There's
yeah.
essentially two different stories, the same timeline, but two
Two
different
different
stories.
stories.
So, so yeah, they've said it's going to be two seasons. They've also said they're not going outside of the game.
Okay.
So, that'll be it unless the next game comes out. But
Oh, is there another one planned?
it's supposedly in the works,
Interesting.
but it's very, very early stages. So, no news at all about that,
Interesting.
except that just like people finding, job listings online
Yeah.
for people, Naughty Dog looking for artists
Artist.
that
Yeah.
are blatantly for a Last of Us project.
Gotcha.
So,
Yeah. Really, I haven't played either game, but really enjoyed the first season overall. Um, Excited to watch the next one. It's early next year, isn't it?
they didn't specify, just said
Interesting.
2025, but I would
2025.
guess early since they're
They're
showing
showing trailers
trailers
already.
now.
I think
I
it is
think
a earlier. That makes
it was
sense.
January or February that the first season started, I believe. So
Yeah,
I assume they'll follow the same
that'll be
path.
interesting. But yeah, the only complaint I have about Last of Us is like we can barely eat mushrooms in our house anymore, just because my wife can't do mushrooms anymore.
Oh,
Basically,
I didn't
I
eat to
love
begin with.
mushrooms, and it doesn't bother me the mushroom people and all the other things, but a lot of people like just can't. She just can't.
See, for
We
me, it was
basically spend
confirmation.
time.
It was
Oh, okay.
confirmation for me. I
Well,
was already on the no mushroom train
okay.
before the game or the show.
This show's gonna be great, and I'm excited it's gonna be back. But I'm gonna get on my soapbox here a little bit and
Okay,
use this
do
as
it.
an example. Can we get shows made every year again? Have we just become so limp-wristed and milquetoast that we have to take 2 years to make a TV show?
Well, there were extenuating circumstances for
The
this one.
strike,
Yeah, that's why.
but would it have been faster? Would it?
A little bit,
Maybe a little
a
bit.
little, maybe 6 months
I
faster.
know, maybe a little bit. I know a lot of. I do know a lot of shows were delayed by the strike, which actually makes sense. And then COVID also threw a wrench into things. But there's just a lot of shows now that even regardless of that are like House of the Dragon. It's like every 2 years. Rings of Power every 2 years, and they're like actually even though the strike's over, nope, just 2 years. Sorry. And I know there's a lot of special effects, but it's like we used to be a country, like a proper country, and we could make TV. And there are still real TV shows where, like the show Slow Horses, which they only do 6 episodes. It's on Apple TV. It's an awesome, awesome spy show. They're doing 2 seasons a year. Now it's only 12 episodes, but it's spies. It's there are effects and there's set pieces, but it's
So
more focused. But
what you're saying
but
is
they actually have balls.
this,
They have balls and guile, and they get it done.
so this is the actual evidence for you that we are an empire in decline.
We are an empire in decline because we can't get seasons of TV out in back-to-back years. We have to wait and we have to write it. It takes long to animate dragons. It actually is pretty frustrating. But that being said, I mean I know it's like first world problems or
Hey,
whatever, but
Marvel's has been kicking shows out for you.
well, and then all to their everlasting discredit, to be honest. And they've actually mostly quit now. Almost all their shows are canceled.
Yeah, I was gonna
So
say, well,
they were pumping stuff out in a way that was
between that
bad.
and Star Wars, yeah, it was
Yeah. Although those weren't seasons, they were just new shows for the most part. Um, I want to say Loki, which I've heard decent things about the second season of Loki. I actually really enjoyed the first season of the Loki show. Um,
WandaVision
that
was
one did
great.
come out. WandaVision, and
Supposedly,
Agatha's. I've heard good things about
Yeah,
Agatha,
supposedly it's pretty great.
and it is
I'm a
sort of a
big
follow
fan
up. But
of
there's not
Captain
a
Marvel.
second season of WandaVision. Was there a second season of Falcon and the Winter Soldier show? Maybe.
Maybe there
That may
is.
not know, but again, it's like we can do one. We know how to do one now. We don't know how to do more than one. It's like it's the meme of can we make a second season of a show, Dad? And the director of Disney is like, we can't. We don't know how.
This is amazing.
Yeah,
This is our new segment, hot takes.
yeah.
Empire's falling.
The Empire's falling. Put seasons of TV show out. Like, get to work. Make it happen, guys.
God, the laziness is astonishing. All right.
Goodness.
So on to our main topic. If you've been listening to the last several episodes,
Yeah.
bunch of episodes, you've heard us talk about or reference Robert E. Howard's short
Yes.
story, The Tower of the Elephant. So today we're going to be talking about The Tower of the Elephant by Robert E. Howard. We're also going to be talking about another short story called Six from Atlantis by Gene Wolfe,
Gene Wolfe.
because we cannot go a week without talking about Gene Wolfe. And in case you're interested, both of those short stories are available in this anthology. This is the Sword and Sorcery anthology, edited by David G. Hartwell and Jacob Wiseman.
It's like
And this is
600
a
pages or something.
yeah, and it's fucking stacked. You got Robert E. Howard, Michael Moorcock, Fritz Lieber, George R. R. Martin, Glenn Cook, Carl Edward Wagner, Paul Anderson, Gene Wolfe. It's just I've been diving into this. It's an absolutely remarkable anthology. So if you are interested in sword and sorcery generally, and if you find our discussion of these two short stories today interesting, uh, find you a copy of this. There's used copies available all over, and I think there's a Kindle edition that you can buy as well, I believe.
Yes. Yes. I
Um,
got it. Oh, and I got mine from the library,
yeah.
which
So
to,
they're
to,
they're
to
out
read
there.
through. But yeah.
It's not actively being published, but it is there are copies out there.
Yes.
Um,
And I have heard that every collection by David Hartwell, he did a number of these style of collections or anthologies in different genres and different focuses, and I have heard that everything the man was involved with was good too.
yeah,
So if you see that name, you know what you're getting is quality.
yeah, absolutely. So, Tower of the Elephant.
Yeah,
Initial impressions. We read this for the first time almost exactly a year ago.
yeah,
Was
wow.
when we were reading that first collection of Conan
And it's the
stories.
fourth. It is the fourth Conan story,
Yes.
so it's really early days. So and I've I've recently I think we've all have to a little bit. I took a trip to Minneapolis at the beginning of August, and in a little free library, one of the little boxes,
Yeah.
I found a couple paperbacks, 70s paperbacks of Robert E. Howard, which kind of uh like it was kind of serendipitous or whatever, and kind of put him back at the forefront of my mind from reading these stories last year. Um, Not read both of those all the way through yet, but read a little bit, and it really it was really great because it was a Brand McMorran collection and a Cormac McArt collection. I hadn't really read any Howard outside of Conan, and I'd heard great things about Howard in general, and really loved overall of the Conan stories, but I didn't know if he was like a one trick pony.
Right.
But reading those, it was like, oh, I've been really I had, unbeknownst to myself, been underrating him as an author. He writes really well. Like Conan wasn't his only good idea.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot of really good ideas. Um, and reading about the timeline of his writing, he started writing in the I think about 1923 is when he got his first story published, and then his first sword and sorcery story was a Call of Atlantis story in 1926. It was bought pretty quickly, but not right away. It was called The Shadow Kingdom. It's phenomenal. That I read that in recent days after being inspired by finding those paperbacks. And the Cole stories are phenomenal. You can really see Cole's a very similar character to Conan in a lot of ways, also very different in others. Um, what's really interesting is By This Axe I Rule was an unpublished Cole story that got repurposed into Phoenix on the Sword,
Oh, interesting.
which ends up being the first Conan story.
Yeah.
Um, by the time Howard writes Conan, it's 6 years later. He ended up getting three Cole stories bought and published, and he wrote quite a few more that he never really totally finished or never really couldn't get them published. That was one thing that was really interesting reading about um, his history. Was he actually had a hard time getting a lot of his stuff published, or would take notes on things and would work on them, but also didn't really. It was sort of a wanted to work on them, didn't want to change what he was into much, but that the Conan idea came to him once he was in the H.P. Lovecraft circle. And I
Hmm.
want to say the first mention of Conan was he actually wrote a letter to Clark Ashton Smith, who was a part of that same group, saying that like the idea for Conan just kind of all at once formed in his mind. He wrote Phoenix on the Sword, repurposing the By the Saxai rule, submitted it. The publisher for Weird Tales, whose name escapes me, liked it but had notes. And as far as I understand, all at once Howard wrote the Phoenix on the Sword, then wrote the Frost Giant's Daughter and the God in the Bowl, all in one series. And I think there's evidence that he was pretty discouraged that he got notes, but then he did work on them and got Phoenix bought, and then quickly in that time wrote uh Tower of the Elephant, which is the first Conan story that was accepted immediately. The publisher got it and accepted it right away. And then after that, I think he wrote a couple more adventure, like more experimental. That's not the right way to put it. Conan stories that they fought, the publisher and him fought, and that's when. And if you remember the collection we read, which is has them in the date
Written
they were
order.
written
Yeah,
order,
yeah, yeah.
there's a after Tower of the Elephant and a couple others, you get into the very pulpy ones that are
Yes.
just very classic adventure stories. Because he was like, I'm not gonna fight this anymore. And he was like just trying to make money and not that doesn't mean they're
Well,
devoid of artistry,
yeah,
but they're just very just
they're fun.
they're
That's
just
but
fun on and
then
he did that for several years until you get to the end of the Conan stories when he starts to like Conan's like in America all of a sudden and dealing with it sort of changes and it gets a little more thoughtful and then the character was abandoned and then sadly Robert E. Howard took his life after his mother's death. Um but that's sort of the background for like what he was doing with this story. But think I think Tower on the Elephant really combines Howard's somewhat more philosophical, somewhat more uh creative impulses with but with also just a really pulpy fun.
yeah. So I didn't know that it was the first story of his that got accepted no notes,
No, yes.
but it makes
It
total
does it does
sense
make total sense.
because
Yeah.
it's I I think it is far and away his best Conan story,
Yeah.
and I'm still exploring his other works, but
Yeah.
thus far it is still the best thing that I've ever read of his.
I think
Uh,
there are some I think I like more and I don't know if that's my like I have a impulse to be obtuse and maybe a little off the beaten path for things I like. That being said, it's no shade at
yeah,
Tower of the Elephant. And I do think I will say Tower of the Elephant is a story that revisiting it to have this conversation, I still really enjoyed it. Um, there is nothing like the first time you read it
100%. Yeah,
because it is so surprising, especially the ending. Um, that like it's not quite a Gene Wolfe story where the surprises are
but
interrelated. That
there's
where
some
like
elements though.
there
There's some
are there
elements
are.
where you could
I don't want
I
to
think you could
disparage it.
see I could see you could obviously Gene is no longer with us, but
Yes.
I could
Well,
see this one having been uh, at least something
well,
that caught his attention.
absolutely. And we know he enjoyed Conan, and we know he enjoyed Howard. And I think it's hard to say specifically this story, although I think it is. But Conan's influence on fantasy is by most people remarkably underrated,
Absolutely.
especially Robert E. Howard's writing. The popular conception of Conan that kind of forms in the 70s and maybe 60s, where you just only ever see him as a muscle-bound loincloth man. The thing I was surprised reading these was like how, especially the early ones, they're like, there was no loincloth. It's like he's not just in his underwear.
But
It shows up once you're like about 6 or 7 stories in. He's like, there are like a bunch of stories where he's like just in his underwear
yeah,
and that vision of him is kind of locked in. But I was really surprised, especially in Phoenix on the Sword. Like it was like he's never naked in this.
yeah, he's fully
Basically, he's
clothed,
fully clothed like
like
the whole
ready for
time.
battle.
I know. It's like, which actually, like, yeah, maybe that. Yeah, I thought that would that was something that was added on and developed into
Right.
the character,
Yeah.
not the other way around.
Well, and even in the In Tower of the Elephant, he's described, and when we first see him appear in the story, as you can see his muscles
Yes.
bulging
No,
through
he's
the
jacked.
clothes that
Yes.
he's wearing.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely.
that's I think this particular story, as we've said before, is like a perfect example of how wrong everyone is about Conan and about Robert E. Howard.
Yes.
Like, there's even a part where it references how Conan spent a very long time sitting and listening to philosophers and priests of various religions, and he thinks it's all hokey and
Yes.
didn't like it, but he still
Yes.
like took the time to. He's not a dumb barbarian. He's sitting and trying to
No.
understand and learn about
No. He
other
he's
philosophies
a
and ways of thinking.
well, and a few things. He is a simple man,
Yes.
but even as a king and Phoenix on the sword, he is a simple man who, as king, does try to do good. Now he has ascended to and or usurped the throne by conquest, but in general, he's considered a good ruler. So
Yeah.
you really,
And a ruler with an appreciation for poetry and
yes, you can't be a dunce being a good ruler. The
yeah,
idea was not some. He's not just a meathead and a jock. It's
yeah,
there's more going on. Um, there's there's more of the eventual, even though Fafhrd is a much sillier character, but Fafhrd sort of singing barbarian, the uh the echoes of that are in Conan.
absolutely.
They're there that then Fritz Leiber extenuates and exaggerates is
Well, he
maybe the
does his
wrong
own
word, but
spin
he's doing his spin, but it's
on that
there.
character.
It's there.
Yeah.
It's not totally unique to Leiber.
It's not the modern Dungeons and Dragons stereotype of
No.
barbarian.
We've kind of devolved from the complexity in some of the barbarian conceptions.
Absolutely.
Um,
100%. Um,
but yeah, it starts. The story starts, and it's Conan showed up to Zamora, which is a city in the part of the Hyborian Age. Oh, interestingly, I left this out. Howard's 8,000 word essay on the Hyborian Age was written. He wrote the first three stories, which was Phoenix on the Sword, The Frost Giant's Daughter, and God in the Bowl. Then he wrote the 8,000 word Hyborian Age essay that's in that first Del Rey
yeah.
collection. And then wrote,
His Silmarillion.
yes, basically, yes. And then wrote Tower of the Elephant. So this comes like basically at peak, probably thinking about this mythical age that he's inventing,
Yeah.
which is post deluge Atlantis falling, um, pre Bible times, but still like lost to history. But very interestingly, like less lost to history than like not the quite mythical magical world of like Atlantis, but the age coming out of that.
Right.
Um, yeah. But we get into it, and he's Conan showed up to Zamora to steal the heart of the elephant.
Well, we meet him in a tavern.
Yes, in a tavern.
And it's
It's the
I
classic
love
tavern.
that scene. It's like it's you could see Indiana Jones walking around. It's like it's Mos Eisley.
Yep.
It's like every amazing tavern that you can think of in fantasy, science fiction. It's like the way that he describes all of the various characters in there, and it's so much fun to read. And yeah, I love it because I love all of those other adventure stories that obviously were so heavily inspired by what he was doing.
I really do want to read more um, of what exists late like 1800s fantasy and some of the stuff that predates Howard because I'm curious to see what he was pulling from. It does really feel like so much that he did he really is the progenitor of a lot of this stuff where obviously Howard didn't invent taverns,
Right,
but how often was that tavern scene
right.
used before this? Um,
There's one of our next series.
yeah,
Tavern,
taverns.
tavern.
I mean, for real though. I talk about Dungeons and Dragons though, like almost every how many like what is it? Probably like 70% of Dungeons and Dragons games start in a
Oh
tavern.
yeah, 100%. Or at least you're going back to taverns
Yeah.
to get your next mission. But yeah, between something like this and then like Bree,
Hmm.
the Prancing Pony.
Well, and I mean, I'm getting ahead of ourselves, but I mean, I was thinking about it today where Conan fights a giant spider in this.
Yep.
It's
Yeah.
like
So many fantasy
it's not
tropes.
quite it's actually probably about the size of the spiders in The Hobbit,
Yeah.
which comes out 5 years later. Again, we know from Tolkien's history that he had Ungoliant already, I think, conceived in his mind at that time, in his Silmarillion histories that he had written a bunch about before ever writing The Hobbit. But it's hard for me not to believe that they're at least pulling from some of the same ideas.
Absolutely.
If not, there's some direct cross reference there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Um, Another interesting thing about Tower of the Elephant is this is the youngest that we get Conan. He's
yes,
about 18, 19 years old.
yes,
And so chronologically, this would be the first Conan story.
yes,
Um, and so he's a less experienced Conan. He
yes,
still is obviously extremely capable.
and very headstrong.
Yes. But willing to learn
Yes,
as we see later. So in this tavern, he's looking for information. He's doing the D&D quest thing. He's going
yep,
looking for information at the tavern about this magic gem.
that he wants to steal.
Yeah, from the Tower of the Elephant.
Yes,
And everybody is calling him a dumb barbarian because
well, because it's the city of thieves.
yeah,
Yeah,
everybody in this tavern. That's the most Isley comparisons.
it's
Like
so
it's
good.
the wretched hive of scum and villainy is
Yeah,
this tavern specifically.
and basically being like, if anyone could steal this, it already would have been stolen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
um, and of course he does kill somebody in the tavern when
yeah.
all the lights go out.
Han shot first.
Yeah, and Conan stabs first.
It's interesting to think
It's
of
brilliant.
Han. Han is not a Conan character in that he's a barbarian,
Well, you could
but there are
in this
he is
story,
that kind of archetype.
if we want to talk about like D&D uh character classes, Conan in this story is a rogue. He's not
Rogue,
even really a
yeah,
barbarian in
yeah,
this one.
a thief. I mean, yeah, rogue and
And
a
so
thief, yeah,
like Han is definitely a rogue.
absolutely.
So
Not a
there's
muscle
some
bound rogue because
right.
muscles aren't as of use in the Star Wars world. Um,
But
it's
it's
yeah,
interesting. It's a fun and interesting
it is,
comparison.
it is.
Um,
I've just never thought about the parallel between Han and Conan, but they are there. It's
there are some
absolutely
fun
it's
similarities
absolutely
between
there.
them.
It's absolutely there.
Yeah. Um, but from there he just decides to go and do it. So
Mhm.
he finds the Tower of the Elephant and it's surrounded by a sheer wall that he, with his physical capabilities, is
Yes.
able to jump over.
Yep.
And on the other side, he finds a dead body.
Yes.
Um, and from there, we meet Taurus,
Taurus. Yeah.
who is the man responsible for said dead body.
Yes. Turns out he is also a master thief.
Yeah, such a master thief that Conan has heard of his name.
Yes.
And I love the explanations that we get. Like Howard did such a great job of like sprinkling in a couple little like story hints to show like, oh, this guy does know what he's talking about.
Yes.
Like the whole stealing the pouch of poison powder
He's stolen
from a
the Black
caravan.
Lotus. Yep. Which is his greatest heist yet. Which we find out was from like some Stygians, I believe. He stole the secret Black Lotus powder that
But it's
they.
being like it's coiled, a snake is coiled around it, and it's
Yeah.
asleep, and he steals it without the snake waking up.
Yeah.
Like
It's awesome.
that's badass.
It's super great. And then Conan chides him for not removing the body. And then he's like, well, actually, I left the body there on purpose, you novice, because when the guards find the body, they will make a ruckus, and that will give me time to escape.
And it's a great character moment for Conan that he
Yes.
doesn't then like try to kill him or something.
No, he
He
doesn't.
like
He's like,
accepts that
okay.
like, oh,
Yeah, that's
actually
actually
that makes
that's
sense.
that's a good point. Yeah, he's not just a total hothead.
Yeah.
He like it's there, but it's not just that. Um,
And from there it kind of turns into
yeah,
this buddy heist.
it's a buddy heist. Yeah, then he unleashes the powder, and Cody's kind of like, "What are you doing?" And it turns out the that little plateau there is full of lions,
Yeah.
which is why it's unguarded at that area. But the black powder kills all the lions.
It
except for one.
it made me think because of Howard was too young to serve, but he obviously was old enough to be well aware of what was going on in World War One, and
Yes,
the way that it's described, this powder that Taurus uses to kill the lions was very reminiscent to me of the gases
yes,
being used in the trenches.
yeah. I wouldn't be shocked at all if that's the thought. It's
Uh,
also like a really kind of fun, magical.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, it's that more element of danger because Taurus describes, if the wind shifts and it starts
we're,
coming our way,
we're gonna,
just
yeah,
fucking run,
yeah, we're over
book
there.
it. We're over the wall and we're gone.
Yeah.
Abort mission. But it doesn't. And then Conan ends up saving them by killing another one of these lions, and they
Yes.
both kind of comment on how the lion wasn't making any no like the lion pounces, Conan kills it with his sword,
Yes.
very last minute.
Yes.
And
And
it,
they're both, it's remarked that he was shocked by Conan's reflexes.
well, and Conan was shocked by the fact that the lion didn't make a roar when he leapt either.
Yes.
And I can't remember if they explicitly say it, but it kind of seemed like the lions were at least trained or maybe disfigured so that they wouldn't make noise, so that they
Oh
were
yeah,
silent,
yeah, that's interesting.
so that they could sneak up on anybody that got over the wall.
So, we're obviously going to be talking about a Gene Wolfe story. I know you've not uh yet read the Long Sun series,
Correct.
but there is a heist in the first book of that series guarded by giant cats. And it there's not a black powder thing, but
We'll
there's
return to this
yeah,
because
yeah,
I have another thing that we'll
yeah,
get to.
yeah.
So
It's
so they
but it's there. Yeah, it's
yeah,
there. Yeah.
I have to think that Gene Wolfe loved this story
I
because there's another thing.
has to. Yeah.
There's another thing.
Yeah.
So they Taurus has this magic rope that this is the second story that like reveals like, oh, this guy is legit, where he's it was from he made this rope from hairs from
Yes.
like very like witches or something,
Yeah.
and braided it and then soaked it in out of blood or something. I
Yeah.
don't I'm forgetting the exact details, but it was another one of those like, oh, hell yeah,
Yeah.
sword and sorcery.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and because of that, it's capable of bearing both of their weight as they climb
Those
the
are both
tower.
that and the Black Lotus powder, and that they're not the only ones. Are such great moments that are they're true fantasy moments that let your imagination run.
Yeah.
Because it's like I'm going to mention a thing, we're not going to get more detail on it really, and the point is that you could just stop the story at that moment and just like ponder on the people's mentioned. Who did he steal this powder from? Like it's like where are they? And it's like that Tolkien does that a bunch. It's actually one of my favorite things about fantasy is that don't explain everything. Don't have it like yes, have a conception of it. Have enough of a conception of it to where it feels grounded and real, but then just let me be able to wonder.
Yeah, when it immediately adds depth
Yes,
and width to your world because
absolutely,
like there's other things that have happened outside of this story.
absolutely.
When it's brilliant, and the fact that he was able to tell so much with just those two little things where it doesn't bog down, it's a short story. You don't want it to get bogged down
No,
in world building.
I think it's right about 30 pages.
Yeah, and so it's so well written. But then when they get to the top, there's all these they're encounter all of these different treasures inside this tower, and Conan is ready to just fill up some bags and peace out. But
Yeah,
Taurus is telling him, wait, if we get what we came here for,
it's worth all this and more.
yeah. Um, which there's some irony there at the end.
Yeah.
But shortly after that, unfortunately, Taurus gets got.
He says, "Let me go through the door first."
Yeah,
And Conan's like, "No,
classic D&D dungeon crawling mistake.
absolutely." And interestingly, I reading this the first time, I thought it was that Taurus was going to then betray
I
Conan,
did too.
but
Sure.
then he just gets killed.
He just gets killed.
Conan goes around the side, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because he doesn't see what happens. He comes upon Taurus dying
yeah,
with puncture wounds
yeah.
and like gangrenous looking puncture, like or necrotic looking puncture wounds,
Yeah.
which having had a spider bite since the last time we read this was slightly triggering. But yeah, so then that's when we have our giant spider
Is it
encounter.
about man size?
Yeah, that's what I think
Give or
your
take.
Mirkwood spiders is
They're not
it's
Shelob.
not Shelob.
It's not Ungoliant, which is
Right, but
absolutely massive. But
it's big.
yeah, it's big and it's really fast. And so he goes into this room. He doesn't know what's going on for a while. Ends up locked in a spider. And at this point, the story's just really fun.
Yeah.
And we've gone through so many little adventures of solving obviously you go to tavern to wall to meeting the master thief to poisoning the lions to battling a lion to now we're fighting a giant spider. It feels like we've established the parameters of this story. And my expectation for basically the rest of it was that we're going to enter a few new areas, battle a few new monsters, and eventually this wizard,
Yeah.
Yara,
Yeah.
who is the holder of the heart of the elephant, and we believe that it allows him to do his wizardry of some kind. We're kind of led to believe. But that's sort of that's that's my expectation. I feel like that would probably was that probably
Yes,
where you
absolutely.
were at with the story,
100%.
and would have been pretty happy with that
Yeah, it
too.
would have been great fun.
As long as we're like battling a wizard, like cool, like I don't know what's gonna happen here, but
Sword
it's
and
great.
sorcery, man.
Yep.
Sword and sorcery.
So yeah, so he kills
He kills the
the
spider.
spider, and then
Things take a turn. Then he sees what he thinks maybe is a statue at first, because
he
there's
descends it.
this.
Does he descend a tunnel?
Yeah, and on
Yeah,
this throne-like chair is sitting
a
this
green
green
man
man's body.
with an enormous elephant's head.
Yes. And obviously, like marks of torture and everything all over him. But it's
Assumes it's like I guess like a bronze statue that's
yes,
maybe gone green.
yeah, yeah, oxidized bronze.
Yeah.
Until it starts talking to him,
Yes.
and and turns out it's very much alive, and it's an alien.
Yes. Yag Kosha
So Yag is an alien
from
from
the planet Yag,
a
the
that
green
is
planet.
outside of orbiting outside our solar system.
Yes.
And so yeah, so all of a sudden out of nowhere, and this is very Gene Wolfe, this
Yeah.
science fiction element.
Yes. It's very Gene Wolfe. And um this I want to say that well there more aliens like this don't really show up in any more Conan stories. But reading a few other Robert E. Howards in the non-Conan oeuvre, there are a number of stories where you get to the end and then there's like a bunch of exposition on history or a history of a people. There's a number of stories that kind of end that way, and we get that here, where Yagkosha gives this long monologue on where he's from, and then the history of seeing humans risen up from apes, and then Atlantis become a glorious, you know, people, and then the waves destroying them, and then them descending with the Picts back into the Stone Age, and then that even on for years and years and years until um, the sorcerer Yara has now imprisoned him and tortured him and uses him with the heart of the elephant to uh to commit his sorceress acts um
Yeah,
and
he's like a power.
abilities.
He's kind of a power source for this
Basically,
sorcerer.
basically, yeah.
But yeah,
He's
so
basically enslaved. It's awesome.
yeah, it's so wild,
Yes,
so wild. So
and
are
it
you ready? Okay, do we?
go
You
ahead,
okay?
go ahead.
Okay. So here's my thing that this is maybe reaching,
Okay,
but since you're bringing up this thing that I wasn't aware of because I haven't read Longsign yet,
sure.
it makes me think maybe it's not such a reach. In Claw of the Conciliator, well, okay, so in Tower of the Elephant,
Okay,
Conan meets a green alien who was
okay,
enslaved
okay.
and
Yes,
has experienced all sorts of different times and came to Earth as an observer.
yes.
In Claw of the
The
Conciliator,
Green Man,
Severian meets the Green
the
Man,
Green Man.
a green alien who
Yes.
is enslaved from a different time.
Yes. And instead of from the deep past is from the future.
Yes.
But I absolutely think that
And they fulfill similar
they do
roles.
fulfill
And
similar
and
roles.
does does he save the Green
He
Man
he lets him go. He lets him go.
as Conan? So
No,
that's
I
my
now that you've said that, with because honestly, until rereading it, I'd forgotten the elephant was green.
I had two.
And it's like, oh
I had
yeah,
two,
he's
100%.
green.
Yeah.
Um, I that knowing Gene, and he makes his Green Man makes sense because it's all the new sun has come, and now the Green Man is green because he has basically algae living in his blood.
Right.
So it all makes sense in the world. It is that absolutely has to be an illusion.
I think it has to be.
Has to be.
And then I'm just now thinking of this. I don't know if this is at all anything. Dissery is green.
Interesting.
Abel is the Green Knight because Dissery is green, but I wonder if there's maybe
So
something
green is a
there too.
big deal. Um, green and blue in sort of a, well, again, we are a big deal in Wolf. There are a green and blue planet in Fifth Head of Cerberus. There's a green and blue planet in the Short Sun
Well,
series.
and you look at Earth from outer space, we're a green and blue planet.
Yep. And the moon is green
Yep.
in
Book of
New
New
Sun
Sun.
as well. So there's green and blue are very important, and I think take on very symbolic uh are so yeah, I absolutely,
Dissery
you're
is
absolutely
probably
right.
a reach to be directly
Well,
connected to
it
Tower of the Elephant.
directly connected to this, yes. Connected to Gene Wolfe's conceptions of those colors as symbolic and meaningful. I don't. I think absolutely,
Almost, yeah,
absolutely,
100%. Yeah. So,
absolutely.
anyways, that
That
was.
one. Shout out to Mark Ramini. Let us know what
Are
we're
we on base? What do you think?
Let us know.
Is the Green Man and the elephant of the Tower of the Elephant, are they connected? I think it's kind of cool. Um, but yeah, so Yag gives Conan, uh he begs him to help him,
Yes,
and
and to
Conan,
help him, he says, "Take my heart out, pour my blood all over the gym."
yeah, and specifically says death isn't the same for me.
Yes,
And so Conan does it because
yes,
Conan feels bad for him.
he
Again,
does.
not a very stereotypical barbarian
No,
reaction.
no.
Um, and he takes the gem. He fulfills his quest for Yag,
Well, and he's told then go give a message to Yara.
and then go give a message to Yara,
Yep.
and he finds Yara asleep, and he repeats what he's supposed to say. And does he give him the gem,
He
or is it just
Yes. Yes. So he comes upon Yara, who is said to be in lotus dreams. He's sleeping, having yellow lotus dreams,
yeah,
which is
he's
our second. He's
as
high.
high as
He's
balls.
high. He's high and stripping. But then he awakens him and says, I've come to give you a last message from Yakosha. Gives him the gin. Yara stands up, shocked, and it said at first he's described as being like a giant, basically,
Yeah,
and like towering over Conan. And then he quickly begins to dwindle,
he's
and
physically shrinking.
basically in this one long paragraph shrinks down to like smaller than Conan and the size of a little boy, and then quickly, like, the gem is like, I think would fit about like this in the size of your hand, I
Yeah,
think the way he's about to describe. And then he's smaller and smaller than the gem. He starts climbing up the top of the gem as a little man, and then he descends into the gem when Conan, and he's like writhing and do that when Conan sees a winged elephant man fly through the gem. Yara screams, and then the gem just like evaporates in a flash of rainbow light.
and as he's instructed, he gets the hell out of there.
He does. He's told to leave. He comes down. He gets into the guard room and sees that all the guards are dead. And Yag had promised that Conan's way would be safe to leave. And then he comes out of the tower safely, has a moment where he ponders, like, did that just happen? Was that real? When he looks back up, and the top of the tower just like
Yeah,
obliterates.
and all, yeah, it just crumbles.
And then
It just
and and story's done.
Yeah, so good.
It's great.
It's and like
It's
like
great.
like you were saying, already it's just a great adventure.
Yes.
And then this left turn that it takes, it elevates it to such a level that it's just absolutely phenomenal.
I I rem- I really like knowing it's coming. It really is still wonderful. The first time I read this, my like jaw hit the floor, genuinely being like, what am I reading?
Yeah.
I didn't know there was a conception of life on other planets in these stories. I didn't know that was a thing. I was very curious if they're going to come up. It doesn't really come back up. There are some maybe hints to things with some like flying man apes and some stuff there in later stories. There's some winged beasts of uh strange origin in some stories as well. But this one really is just like holy smokes.
Well, and
I
it's so well written. I can't
It really
overemphasize
is.
like
It
it.
really is.
That was for me, like just besides how fun the story was, like it was the moment for me where I was like, okay, Robert E. Howard is like he is not discussed as much as he should be as a phenomenal writer,
He
as an
really is.
incredible author.
He is not in 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 circles where older pulp fantasy is still revered and admired. He is given his due, but in the wider fantasy community, um,
Feels like he's either
he
ignored or
is
forgotten,
ignored and forgotten. Um,
and it's criminal.
it absolutely is. Where he's just as, and honestly, I love Tolkien, so this is not like I could be convinced that Robert E. Howard's stories are actually more influential than
Perhaps
Tolkien on fantasy.
if you look at
And
the
I don't mean
modern
that as a
state,
disparagement of fantasy.
if you
I
look
don't.
at modern fantasy, in a
Yes,
lot of cases, the grim dark and everything is much closer to what Howard was writing than what
yes,
Tolkien was writing.
absolutely. And um, it feels also like that. I think people would say, oh, okay, well, the world building side comes from Tolkien, but then like adventure stories come from Robert E. Howard, and maybe to some degree
It's
that's
not as,
true.
but
But
nobody
it's
did it
actually
like
world.
Tolkien did.
No, but world but here's the thing. Robert E. Howard stories are not lacking in world building
100%.
at all.
Yep.
He wrote 8,000 word essays just on the history of his times. The thing is, he just didn't write a bunch of novels.
Yeah.
So, like,
Well,
he didn't
yeah,
get granular things. He actually, though, hypothesized writing novels like that.
yeah,
We just never got them.
which is
It's
a
a,
horrible
it's a,
shame. And
it's
you
a
also
tragedy.
do, but if you have to read, he was writing short fiction, and so you have to read more
You have to
things
read
of
all of it.
his
Yes.
to get
And there's
how
snippets. Yeah,
how intense his world building actually
absolutely.
was.
When actually very similar, honestly, the similarities to Tolkien, reading more of his work, and I've not read it all yet, where Tolkien has his first age and his creation of the world, and then his second age, which is his, really his Atlantis age with the Numenorians, and then the creation of the rings, and then you've got his third age. Basically, the first age that we know in Tolkien is the setting for Howard. That's his call stories.
Sure.
Are
Yeah.
are that time, that super mythical past. Then the second age is something in between those times.
Yeah.
And I guess Atlantis is there for them, so it's a little bit vague there. But then you've got that, and then the Hyborian age. Although I've heard people say that the Hyborian age would be the fourth age, the way we actually
Sure.
think about it would be taking place if you think about it, where the
If you're
third beginning
taking
of the
Middle
fourth
Earth as being pre
pre.
history,
Yeah.
yeah,
But there's a similar sort of there's some very similar parallels in the way these two men were thinking about fantasy and the history of the world. Robert Howard was clear. He wasn't trying to actually hypothesize an actual history um of our planet, but was speaking to something. There was something in the water at the time that these two fantasy greats were both leaning into.
well, I
And
think
then,
he was kind of tapping into, he wasn't maybe he wasn't writing a mythology like Tolkien was, but he was very much trying, like exploring some of the very same stories that people like Graham Hancock, um,
absolutely.
and, people that are researching and looking into the concept of Ice Age lost Ice Age civilizations.
Absolutely.
It's that
It's the
same.
same idea.
It's that
It's the
same.
same idea.
That same idea. Those
And
stories.
I very interestingly as well, Howard are kind of, and they are different writers, Tolkien, and I'm comparing them a bunch here, but like Tolkien and Howard are very different writers, but Tolkien was a professor, and a philologist who wrote late in his life, um, and whose writing very nearly didn't exist, without C.S. Lewis really encouraging him to do it. We don't get his writing till way later, where he meticulously wrote it over a very long period of time. And Howard's story is the exact opposite. A
Yes.
very young writer in his 20s, writing for pulp magazines, and then also opposed to Tolkien completely, where like, and I'm not going to say that Tolkien isn't, not that Tolkien is like anti-consumerist or anything, but again, was writing, um, as an older man, not for a market in the same way where Howard absolutely was doing that. Where like it really pains me, especially the more I think about it, like what we didn't get from Howard,
Yes.
um,
I,
because of, and again, like the depression and the downturn in sales obviously encouraged that. Then obviously, then his mom dies, and he was a man
he
full
was
of despair
mentally
at that
unwell,
point.
and
He was mentally,
yeah,
yeah, just
it's
really,
a absolute tragedy. And
it
I
really,
think
really, really is.
the bottom line, and I think I speak for both of us, is that to kind of to summarize here is that Howard and Tolkien should be mentioned in the same
It's the same
conversations
breath.
and
Yes,
held in similar levels of reverence,
absolutely. Absolutely.
especially as fans of speculative fiction and fantasy specifically.
Well, and Fellowship of the Ring is really well received. Really explodes as a popular, uh in the 60s is really when it like exploded in fame near the very end of Tolkien's life. He never completes and finishes the Silmarillion. It's published posthumously. And then in the 70s you get all the animated Tolkien stuff because the popularity was just growing and growing. Um a similar thing happened to the Conan stories where they're repackaged. The Franzetta art really like really
Yes.
creates the modern conception,
Yes.
and those covers that Franzetta made. And then that kind of culminates in the Schwarzenegger Conan films in the 80s. They're 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 running on similar timelines
Truly.
so much, but we got Tolkien for longer. Interestingly, I think overall Robert published more work, which
Yes.
is weird to think about.
He certainly,
It's
while he was alive,
yes,
he did, because
yes,
so much of Tolkien's has been published
yes. And
posthumously.
I'd have to look at word count because obviously, like, uh, published in his lifetime, I think with
If you're including all of the different series,
yes,
Solomon Kane,
everything.
Carl,
Yes,
Graham McMore, and
it's
everything,
more.
I think so.
And then a lot was published after his death too, because most of the cult stories we get later on that were collected afterwards. There was a lot of Solomon Kane stuff that wasn't published. There were a number of Conan stories that weren't published right away, but it's that's the one thing too that's crazy about Howard. Really, truly, insanely prolific.
Yeah.
Wrote a ton.
So I think we can transition here um, to our second story. I think this is a good place to transition
Yeah.
because um, I think that writers in the fantasy genre and the sci-fi genre acknowledge Howard,
Yes.
especially from the 60s through 90s, I guess.
Yes.
Um, and Gene Wolfe among them.
Yes.
Six from Atlantis, which included in the Sword and Sorcery anthology, but
Yes.
originally was written for a different anthology that was writers from Texas,
Yes.
where Howard was from.
Yes. And Gene Wolfe lived for a time.
Yeah, writing Robert E. Howard type stories for an anthology that was I can't remember if it was for an anniversary or his birthday or something, but it was in tribute to Robert E. Howard. Texans writing Howard
Yes.
stories in tribute to Howard. And so that leads us to Six from Atlantis, which is
Yes.
a much shorter story. It's
Yes.
only a couple pages
Eight.
long.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Being a wolf story, he packs a bunch of stuff into that
He
couple of
does.
pages.
He
Um,
does.
but it was essentially Gene Wolfe because it's this Texas thing. He's writing a kind of Western showdown in the Robert Howard sword and sorcery vein
Yes.
instead of cowboys,
Yes.
which is brilliant and like exactly how Gene Wolfe would decide to write something
Yes.
for a Robert E. Howard Texas
Yes.
anthology. But it's a very simple premise. You have this man named Thane, or that's what he's called now.
Yes. We get told he goes by the name of Thane of Ophir, which is a named place in Robert E. Howard's Hyborian mythos. It's like northern Italy, maybe.
Yeah, and he lands on this place
Hmm.
and goes into this jungle alone without his crew of five. So
Yes.
that's the six
There's the
from
six. Yep.
Atlantis. And as he meets this woman, after he's walking along this path, and the gravel turns into these gemstones, and he
Yes.
picks up one of them and is admiring it and drops it presumably into his bag, and it just kind of disappears. And then this woman appears
Yes.
and says that her king is not happy with that, and he needs to go with her.
Yeah.
And through their conversations, we do get in a very Wolfian manner, but also Wolf doing Howard brilliantly. Uh, if you didn't know the title, you would be able to piece together that these are like the six or some of the six only survivors of Atlantis.
Yes.
So pre-Conan story,
Yes.
in Howard's timeline.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of nice little details. The Black Lotus.
Yep.
Um,
He
and
mentions turning down the Black Lotus.
yes,
Yes.
yeah. So that's mentioned. Because of course it's Wolf. He's going to sprinkle some references in. Um,
Well, and then when he gets into the throne room, he sees a woman who makes him think of Red Sonja.
yeah,
We get just get a little
which
mention of Red Sonja.
is a Howard character.
Yes.
The Howard version is a gunslinger,
Yes.
leading to this Western style story.
Yes.
But of course, Red Sonja also more familiarly is a Conan type character
Yeah.
in comic books and other
Chainmail bikini.
movies. Yeah, the chainmail bikini, red hair.
Yes.
That's how we know her. So it's a
Yes.
well again, it's Wolf.
It's
Like
great.
it's a
It's
Wolf
great.
it's a Wolf reference. Or the way it's presented is 100% a Wolf reference.
Yeah.
Um,
It reminded me a lot of the way the story of the Green Knight is inserted into Wizard Knight,
yes.
where you're just like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Like you just like, because I was reading it and I was like, Red Sonja, what?
Yes, 100%. No,
Yeah.
absolutely brilliant. And again, Wolf does this all the time. Like we just discussed with Howard, brilliant way of like all it is half a sentence,
Yes.
and it presents this larger picture of the world.
Yep.
So it turns out that the woman that found him, this other woman that reminds him of Red Sonja, and several others are all these concubine servants, slaves of this almost King Kong sized ape.
Yes.
So large that it describes him picking up melons of
And
various
eating them like
sizes
grapes. Yeah.
as if they're grapes between his thumb and forefinger.
Yeah.
Um, and they have this back and forth, Thane and this ape king,
Yeah.
and the ape is making it clear that he's going to kill him
Yeah.
because he doesn't have money to pay him off.
Yes.
And I love there's a line before they start fighting, before the showdown happens, where Thane says that he's known many kings and politicians, and at least this one was honest. This giant ape at least was honest.
Yeah. It's great. I love it.
And it's a great fight. It's
It's a great
short,
fight.
but
Short,
it's brilliant.
a little back and forth, and then finally the ape smacks him, and it appears that that Thane is dead when he pulls him in close. And at that point, then he
Thane pulls his knife that
pulls his knife and
we've seen earlier in the
yes,
story and
slits
stabs him in the throat.
stabs him in the throat. And then the ape king is dead.
And he's set upon by the women,
Yes,
and in defense kills several of
several
them,
of them. Yep,
and is finally left with just the one
yep,
uh that took him to the throne room to begin with, and she begs that he takes her with him.
Yep.
And as they go back to the ship, loaded down with jewels, the other five Atlanteans get to pick jewels,
Yep.
and then they leave her
Yep.
because she was the wife of an ape.
Yep. I was like, I'm all good, bro. I do love the line too. And he's like, I wish your hands were bigger so you could take more jewels. It's great.
So it's
No, super fun.
it's so fun.
Super
It's
fun.
very short, and a real testament to Gene Wolfe's skill. Because he really did nail it. Like, if you didn't know it was written by Gene Wolfe, you could, like, if Robert E. Howard's name was on it,
Yeah.
I would
It's
very
believable.
easily think, like, oh, wow, this is a great Robert E. Howard story.
Yeah.
Um,
Wolf actually talked, he talked in an interview I'd read of his where he was like, it was actually, he was talking about C.S. Lewis saying that like something had come out where something had been released in the 80s claiming to be C.S. Lewis that
okay.
wasn't. And he like talked really disparagingly of it. And then basically was said like, I'm really good at mimicking voices and I would do a way better job making fun or not making fun of, but ripping off C.S. Lewis's.
Man, I want to read that.
Me too.
I really want
Me too.
Gene Wolfe's Narnia story.
Yes.
God,
I wonder. I mean, we haven't read everything yet.
maybe it's there.
It might be there.
That would be awesome.
There are a few isms that he does that are Lewisisms. I heard one recently, and I can't think of it now.
Well, while we're on the Wolf train, in
Yeah.
the similar vein, I just was and this probably was reread. I think this was rereading Wolf. Shout out James. Talking about his short story Alien Stones.
Mm.
That I will be buying the collection that it's in very soon because my family, one of the shows I grew up watching because my parents, my mom especially, are massive fans of Star Trek.
Yeah.
And Wolf wrote this short story, Alien Stones, which I guess is his take on a Star Trek story that then ended up, I think, becoming the inspiration for the first Star Trek film. And the
Really?
character from Next Generation of Deanna Troi
Oh,
is also supposedly inspired by one of the
I don't think
characters
I've
from Alien
seen that.
Stones.
That's so cool.
So
Oh no,
I'm
maybe I did see
I'm
it.
looking forward to
Okay, yeah.
definitely looking forward to reading that.
That's
But
awesome.
yeah,
I have Wolf at the Door, which is Gene Wolfe's short story collection. I need to get a few other. The one I've always heard it. The one. Uh, I think if you only get one collection of his, I've heard that you want the Island of Doctor Death and Other Stories
that's
and other stories.
that's
Because the name of the story is The Island of Doctor Death and Other Stories,
and
and the
other stuff.
collection is And Other Stories.
I think that's the one that Alien Stones
Okay,
is on. So
I need to get that one.
that's gonna be
I've had that
the
in my
next
Amazon
Wolf
cart a few
purchase.
times. I need to actually
Yeah.
get. I need
So,
to actually get it.
anyways,
Yeah,
what two awesome stories.
they're great.
This is great. I love
Yeah,
reading this. I
super
love
fun.
talking to you about these.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts?
No, they're fantastic. Sword and Sorcery and generally pulp this older pulp fiction is just so underrated. There is so much great material that I just always tell people don't sell yourself short. There's a wealth of it. Dive into it. There's obviously also lots of great stuff being read now, but I think diving into that world alongside whatever other reading you're doing will only add to
Yeah.
where you can see what people are pulling from and continuing.
And then you find these gems like Tower of the Elephant that is as good or better than anything
And
that's
it's
being
so
written right
once
now.
you read it, it's so clearly like you can see how all of fantasy is indirectly pulling from these stories.
Yeah.
So much, so much.
So, all right, read Tower of the Elephant. Check out Sword and Sorcery anthology. And if you notice, we're back at
Yes,
Smokers Abbey in East
we didn't shout it
Nashville.
out yet. We
So
are.
if you're in Nashville, check them out. Thanks, guys, for letting us record in here again. This is definitely our favorite spot to smoke cigars and drink beer in the Nashville area. So
Absolutely.
yeah, listen to Horsebread, listen to Hole Dweller, and we'll catch you at the next episode. Marie.